As of January 2026, the situation in our society is in a turbulent state. The growing momentum, large-scale protests in individual states and several cities of refuge for illegal immigrants are nothing more than artificially fueled revolutionary aspirations of the Democrats. The upper echelons of power of the Democratic Party are well aware that they will not achieve a socialist or some kind of revolution by such local actions. But they can earn certain points on this in anticipation of further struggle with the Republicans. For an adequate understanding of these processes, it is only necessary to understand the importance of this provision. To realize the truth of life itself. It is not so difficult to understand. These are family values, the mental perception of oneself as a part of this society. The association of oneself with one of the molecules woven by this community on the basis of one culture. If people do not consider themselves to be one, then the encroachments in their ranks become loose. What causes further division, bringing to the fore the question of who we are? Today, Tsarism, born in the Middle East in 2200 to 2100 BC and over the centuries that have spread to all continents, has been transformed in the United States into something new ideological weapon. The external attributes of Tsarism, as always, are adjusted to the foundations of modern public perception, that even a mosquito will not spoil the nose. Internal attributes can be seen, especially if you want to. It is primarily in the vertical of power, in the vertical subordination of everyone and everything, from the top to the very bottom of the bureaucracy. In the United States, such distribution does not take place in state structures, it is, as we know, democratic, elective. The distribution of posts is structured within the party subordination itself. First of all, in the US Democratic Party. One of the attributes of which is the word democratic. Although outwardly it is adjusted to the foundations of free will, there is no smell of it. This blurs the understanding of such an architecture as the accountability of the lower levels to the higher. The party leaders or the Central Committee, when nominating their trusted members to various posts in the state, proceed primarily from party interests. This clan, compressed in the battles of a thousand-year history, considers its highest priority to be accountability through the party bureaucracy. Whatever a member of this party, especially top nominees, does, he is first of all responsible to his party comrades. And he does exactly what his party leadership has predestined for him. Naturally, internal party turmoil remains and dies within the party leadership. This can be found out if you become double agents and break through to the Central Committee over the years. But we do not need this, we can assume this with a probability of 99% in a few days when these intentions appear in the information field of the country. Let's question all the actions of the Democratic Party together, well, at least to comprehend the situation in society into which it was driven by the reformatted Tsarism of Asian origin. As I have already written, Tsarism arose in the first gatherings of the masses in the Middle East. Clan communities, the connecting link of which were the territories of clash for food resources, by some time of their evolutionary development had reached the point of no return that the life of these small clans turned into one continuous struggle for survival. The clan families that survived were so warlike and cohesive that it was more and more expensive and difficult to resist the same families of neighbors. It can be said that the clan communities most concentrated in the territories of the Fertile Crescent have approached the bottleneck, or the phase transition, or the small singularity in their development. This situation would have continued in the future, where the daily struggle for survival would have cost endless and unending generations of victims. But what apparently had to happen happened. At the beginning of the 21st century, excavations in Jordan and Iraq and the subsequent deciphering of writing on clay tablets are eye-opening. The Sumerian civilization, which appeared in the adhesion of clan communities held together by the same rules, the same laws, is identified as the first civilization. It was the first to seal the rules for excluding chaos and permissiveness of all against all. Having structured the attributes of the new power, which included the militant leaders of the Semites on the basis of their ability to negotiate, they closed their ranks, creating unions of clans and tribes, which later collapsed into proto-states. Having become the new architects of the construction of the state, these clans have matured and strengthened over the years. Further, their direct heirs led their peoples on the rise, conquering or absorbing into their structures all the neighboring small families. At the same time, in these excavations, of which a very small number were carried out, archaeologists of our time, in view of the instability and hostilities in these territories, found confirmation of the appearance of a wheel, a plow, a potter's wheel, mathematical calculations, and research on metal processing in Sumer. In short, everything that these clans needed to overcome the neck, to move to a new stage of evolutionary development. Many questions remain about these excavations. But sooner or later, excavations will be carried out and who knows what discoveries await us. But one thing is clear. The mind implanted in the human body made it possible for him to move on, excluding total chaos in the relationships between the members of these communities. This has been a blessing until now. As we now know, at the dawn of the 21st century, humanity has come to an even greater point of no return, to the point of singularity, beyond which we are once again unable to see glimpses of our further progress. At the gates, behind which, by definition, we cannot know what awaits us. Our molecular basis, with its animality, is not predisposed to the notion of such powerful processes. And the fact that it will be much ahead of our concepts becomes clear on the threshold of all kinds of crises superimposed on one another. We can only assume our development in the transition to the universal mind, to the expanses of the macrocosm and the microcosm. Our salvation must lie in understanding the processes that occur with the smallest particles of our world and knowledge of the universe. Today we see the facts of the emergence of civilization based on the achievements of science and technology. It remains to understand how the leaders of the Sumerian civilization were able to make this phase transition in the distant times of the beginning of this civilization and on the basis of what of their achievements they were able to make this phase transition. Some developments can be seen through thousands of years. One of the versions is the appearance of another civilization on these lands. Civilizations of aliens or gods as they were called in the cuneiform inscriptions of Sumer. It is possible to obtain technologies for organizing large communities within one manageable and controlled boundaries, that is, technologies of political arrangement and technologies of an economic nature, as they say, from hand to hand, directly interacting with aliens. Perhaps by changing the genome of selected individuals from among the chiefs and his retinue. Perhaps by passing on their genes through the birth of children by local women, who will rally into a golden club over the decades. What will give birth to the concept of blue blood? The fact of the emergence of reason is indisputable. These are all our assumptions, but they are more plausible than the version of divine creation. The emergence of power as the controller and organizer of public works was a boon for humanity. It put society within the framework of what was permissible, within the framework of the law, and punished those who deviated from this framework. But at the same time, this power has become a limiter for the masses. The emerging elites erected an all-consuming irremovable power for themselves and their retinue. The creation of dynasties completed the process of absolute monarchy and autocracy. This is how Tsarism was born, with its accountability and vertical of subordination. Where the Tsar, the Lugol, the autocrat with his retinue had absolute and indisputable power up to the last official, who were appointed at their own discretion. In this hierarchy, everything remains secondary except for one thing, without which power becomes subject to distraction. Namely, in the loyalty and sycophancy of all appointees without exception, that is, officials. This was especially true of top, significant officials, whose reward was raised closer to the throne, and as a punishment to distraction. The born and strengthened Tsarism, or we can call it the biosystem of Tsarism, in the Bronze Ages expanded its borders in the Middle East and was ready to continue to absorb nearby communities under its influence, if it did not receive an adequate response from a completely different system of values as a democratic one. Such a biosystem was formed in the south of the European continent, apparently also at the instigation of its Indian newcomers. The fact is that the heirs of these ethnic groups in the past lived in modern Hindustan and, expanding their habitats, ended up in Europe. The Greek legions, not numerous, but completely wild and climatically fitted, fighting endlessly, raided these kingdoms for a century. And soon, having accumulated enough strength, they made a radical change in the history of civilization. Later called the catastrophe of the Bronze Age, the Greek warriors scattered the system of Tsarism around the world, but did not destroy it. The collapse of royal power and fragmentation into lesser elites in the Dark Ages, which came with the influx of the peoples of the seas, led the Semitic elites to an understanding of the settlement of their values around the world and the creation of their enclaves. At the same time, having adopted the tactics and strategy of organizing troops according to the patterns of the democratic system of the Greeks, one of the parts of Tsarism, transformed into Phoenician navigators, moved westward across the Mediterranean. At the same time, creating kingdoms along the shores of this sea, their heirs went to the Atlantic. Later, some of them ended up in Central America. There they will create the Aztec kingdoms with identical power and attributes. Later, they will be blown to smithereens by the Spanish viceroys, the conquistadors, in the person of the papal leaders. All this has been happening for centuries. One of the branches of this institution of Tsarism also got to the northern islands of Europe, and after tens of centuries, from where, after the official procedure of the discovery of the Americas by Columbus, it moved there. They did not succeed in the sole creation of the state here. With varying success, they were opposed by the legions of the papal army, led by the Spanish conquerors and the French bureaucracy. In bloody wars, they had to agree to a joint division of power with the democratic biosystem of the papacy, under which they created state structures based on the values of European civilization, which had already been formed at that time and existed for more than 30 centuries. The war between the North and the South in America was the very division of spheres of influence. In the end, this is how the biosystem of Tsarism appeared, formalized in the Democratic Party, and the biosystem of democratic values under the attributes of the Republican Party. Collisions and minor rough edges have happened throughout history, but the essence of the foundations has been and remains current. So, for 250 years of coexistence within one state unit, these heirs of two opposing systems had to go through fire, water, and copper pipes. 2 world wars and countless local battles, and all these sacrifices in the name of preserving and strengthening their native system of domination in the world field, which identifies only them. The Democratic Party of the United States is one of the satellites of the Tsarist biosystem of Asian origin. Changing, it joined societies, and then, enriching itself, subordinated others to its will, by the hands of the same society. Their minds could afford all kinds of metamorphoses and reformatting. Tsarism has absorbed everything that has fallen before mankind throughout its history. And monarchy, and autocracy, and tyranny, and ochlocracy, and oligarchy, and socialism, and fascism. Everything that made it possible to concentrate the people on maintaining their position as the dominant and the expression of their own will. Only pure democracy, with its will emanating from the immediate people in a concrete location, only freedom of speech and freedom of conscience become an insurmountable wall of royal dynasties. This weapon, born in the battles of the Greek archons, becomes deadly for royalty in different states at different times. But by the end of the 20th century, the heirs of the pharaonic dynasty learned to survive under this formation. Real democracy has become a game formula for them with the masses. In the face of the final onslaught of the complete seizure of power in the United States, 60 to 70 years before the present day, of continuous, methodical and incessant structural changes in countries whose influence was stable, the courtiers carried out subversive activities in institutions where a person became educated, that is, would begin to understand the meaning of democracy. I would understand that freedom must be fought for daily, hourly. Almost all universities were absorbed in a sophisticated perception of democratic values. This was also facilitated by the oversold officials of the top posts in Europe, who clouded the brains of their peoples, giving their members time to finally dupe the American people. So we are back to our days. Fortunately, the disease or infection was not completely sown into the brain centers of the whole country. Islands of democratic values still remained on this continent. A certain number of the masses became a trigger for the restoration of democratic values. The post that both modern Democratic Party members and Republicans claim by agreement remained the last obstacle to the complete and final possession of the entire United States, and then the whole world. And that moment came at the end of Trump's first term. Everything was ready, but it turned out to be incapable of taking into account the state of Biden, for the laughing members of the Central Committee of the Democratic Party. Old age and infirmity stood across. Even the change to the vice president, a beauty from Africa, did not allow them to play by their own rules. The power with which the non-systemic millionaire Trump paid a visit to the field of activity of the senile structure of the Democratic Party shocked the heirs of Tsarism. It was Trump's team, having prepared in advance for the blow and delivered it decisively, that put the issue bluntly. To be or not to be a civilization based on democratic values and the right of personal freedom.